Welcome to HSBC Global Viewpoint, the podcast series that brings together business leaders and industry experts to explore the latest global insights, trends, and opportunities. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes. Thanks for listening, and now on to today's show.
Hello, I'm Piers Bartley in London, and welcome to the Macro Brief from HSBC Global Investment Research, the podcast that looks at the issues driving financial markets across the globe. In today's episode, we're answering questions about artificial intelligence and how much it is driving the stellar performance of many US companies. The biggest US companies in the S&P 500 index are on course to deliver another quarter of double-digit earnings growth. A significant factor contributing to this success is artificial intelligence. So just how are companies using AI? And what can European companies learn from their American counterparts? To discuss this, I'm joined by Shiva Joon, data scientist, and making his debut on the Macro Brief is Duncan Toms, multi-asset strategist. Joon and Duncan, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Right, Joon, can we start with you? There's so much noise about AI, it's hard sometimes to separate the hype from reality. Thankfully, you've been looking at the data, specifically what companies have been saying in their results. This is part of your Listen Up series. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So we use natural language processing and more modern AI tools as well to sift through company results and see what management is discussing more frequently, what's been the topic of the season, so to speak, and also what's the sentiment when they discuss themes like guidance, revenue, earnings, and also more importantly, what are they discussing when they're discussing AI.
So just for our listeners, just give us a sense of the scale of what you're doing here. Is it all company statements that you're kind of using the large language models to kind of read through and interpret?
So I think our database of companies is actually quite massive now. So globally, it's about 13,000 different companies. In the US, it's a big combination of both large caps, mid caps, and small caps. So we managed to cast a wide net and get really good insights about what the management is discussing across different sectors and across different regions.
So you use a proprietary AI-powered tool, so AI in everything, to analyze sentiment. What is that telling you? Where are the biggest areas of improvement? And is it, in fact, just concentrated on the mega caps?
Yeah, nothing like using AI to tell us what AI is doing. But I think we have our own proprietary sentiment model. And it utilizes both latest generation of AI tools and also previous generation of AI tools. And using both of these different techniques, we find the sentiment in the US when management discusses forward-looking statements is both positive and it's actually improving quarter on quarter. In our experiments, we find the companies which discuss positively about the future generally perform better after the results date. And this measure is particularly positive for companies in the healthcare sector, the tech sector, and the real estate sector in the US. We also kind of wanted to answer the question, is that tailwind just particularly about mega caps?
Yeah, because you see that all the headlines about, there's a Mag 7 and what have you, but it sounds like it's a bit more widespread than that.
It is indeed. It is across sectors. So we separated the two tails of companies in S&P 500, so to speak, so the top 25 and the bottom 100. And then we applied these techniques on both of these basket of stocks, and we see the sentiment improving in both of these baskets, particularly improving greatly in the bottom 100 basket currently. And the key driver there is the tailwind these companies are getting from AI infrastructure and AI enablement practices across US. So we see a lot of companies discussing tailwinds due to providing power to different data centers, different technology in terms of small tech-based technologies from different companies in the US, but also cooling technology for the big infrastructure projects that we are seeing are happening across the country.
Duncan, let's turn to you. You got your hand up, so you obviously want to make a comment. Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Joon quickly, in terms of Europe, how sentiment's developing there versus the US?
So Europe, the sentiment is also positive, but muted. So you can clearly see the US companies are kind of leading that sentiment improvement. And I think the key here, I guess you can perhaps talk a little bit more about, is the disparity we've seen in AI adoption amongst European and American companies.
Indeed, your work seems to have identified that Europe's been a bit more cautious about AI adoption. Why is that?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, it's a good question as to why. I think there's a kind of broad skepticism out there, or there was a broad skepticism out there.
They're worried about the risks of AI?
Perhaps
or
a little
US
bit.
more to do with regulation, that they want regulations in place first?
I think maybe a little bit is around a more cautious approach with regard to a more regulated environment in Europe. I mean, we've certainly seen that in terms of concerns over data use, privacy concerns, etc. And maybe that links a little bit to GDPR here in Europe. I mean, we've seen Draghi speak about that and how that links to the whole AI backdrop. But what we did earlier this year is have a look at what company management are speaking about with AI in Europe versus the US. And the number one word was cost. So that gave you a flavour of why it was a little bit slower. And this really leads on to AI adoption, where in Europe we see a much lower AI adoption rate than out in the US.
But do you think that's going to change?
Yes, I think it could change. I mean, when we, again, come back to those earnings call transcripts and look at what European companies are talking about with AI versus the US now, they're talking about terms like important, invest, strategic. So it's clear that company management are realising the gravity of the moment here. And that's very much needed to keep up with not only their US counterparts, but in terms of other companies within Europe that have adopted AI. Because we see very specific examples of companies talking about cost savings and efficiency gains, particularly efficiency gains in a wide range, but kind of 20%, 30%, 90%, or even in one case, a 20 times productivity increase. That's enormous.
20 times?
20 times, yeah. So there's a wide range of using AI and how that can improve businesses. And it's clear that Europe is starting to get on board and realise how important that moment is.
And just to both of you, in your work, what's apparent is the market is beginning to reward those companies who are demonstrating AI adoption. I mean, the outperformance is clear, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. So again, using our analysis on earnings transcripts, we can find these companies which are discussing adoption of AI quite frequently and put them into a basket of stocks. And we do see that in the US particularly, that basket of AI companies tend to outperform the broader market. Even then, when we remove the tech-based companies, so that making sure there's no bias in there, and Mag 7 companies, that basket still outperforms the broader market. So there's clearly a big tailwind in terms of generating revenue when companies start adopting these techniques. The question I have for Duncan is, what's the sector difference in Europe in terms of AI adoption? Are we seeing a particular sector adopting it more so than the others?
That's right. There's some quite big divergences, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, tech has one of the highest adoption rates, which is very similar to what we see in the US. But we also see financials and communication services standing out as having higher adoption rates, which might sound a little bit surprising, but that's both sides of the Atlantic. So clearly what we're seeing is a broad adoption across different sectors, and those sectors stand out. But what's very clear in the specific examples among company management and the way they're talking about it is just how wide a wide number of use cases there are, right? So in certain sectors, you're seeing Gen AI being used to explore molecules for hair products, or in other sectors, you're seeing it, say, in energy, to reduce well planning time for drilling for oil, for example. So there's a wide variety of use cases, and how companies are using this most effectively will generate very strong winners and potentially some that are left behind as well.
So coming back to this market outperformance point, it hasn't happened in Europe yet.
No, not yet. Not yet. Perhaps some of that is the lower AI adoption rate. So in Europe, we see an adoption rate of roughly half of that in the US, at 25%. So much lower. So maybe as we see more AI adoption going into 2026, that outperformance might start to come through. And that's something that we're really hoping for. That's the title of your report.
Europe may have its AI moment?
Yes, exactly that. It's missing it for the moment, but we're hoping that it will be coming.
Joon, this analysis is all based on public statements by quoted companies, but you also look at the private sector through your Funding the Future survey, which in essence is looking at what's happening more upstream in the private sector. What did the latest survey reveal?
Yeah, I think the latest survey, the title of the survey is Bulls on Parade. And it's because the investor sentiment in the private market has improved substantially in the most recent wave. And I think 74% of investors are expecting private market activity to increase over the next year. And the key tailwind they cited for that is enthusiasm around AI amongst investors. And that is a really important part for us because, as we've seen throughout history, whatever occurs in the private market generally has a good lead-on effect of what's to come in the public market as well. We are already seeing, as Duncan mentioned, a adoption rate in the US of about 50% within public companies. As we are seeing private companies and private investors becoming more excited about new AI technologies and the near future, I think that adoption rate should just increase in the coming months and years.
So to finish on, and this is something that came out in the survey, that the top AI tailwind was the speed of change in tech. If you think about the internet, it took a few years after all the hype before the benefits became mainstream. Is that pace of adoption that we're sort of living through with AI going to be quicker? It sounds likely, but is it also, in a way, already accelerating compared to, say, even a year ago?
I might have been a bit too young to remember the early days of internet, but I think the adoption rate certainly is very impressive in terms of AI. I think in the US, I'll talk about US, and then I think specific to that, we've seen just through this year where management, not only are they discussing generative AI, which was a big thing in a new technology, but they're now actively discussing agentic AI and applications of agentic e-commerce.
So what is agentic AI for our listeners?
Agentic AI, I would describe, and I might be, it's like people won't like it, but I like to describe it the way it is using AI technology with a lot of scaffolding around it so that you're actively using it to do a wider group of tasks. So you're not just using an AI tool in terms of a chatbot or retrieving information from a document. You're trying to use it to create a pipeline and a working space, so to speak, using lots of scaffolding and software engineering. And companies are actively discussing about using that in the earnings calls, whether for their cost savings, for their margin improvement, or you're seeing a lot of companies actually utilizing to reduce their advertising revenue by utilizing some of these new AI models that have been released from OpenAI. So the adoption rate has certainly been interesting. I think it will continue on that pace in the near term.
Coming back to your question on adoption there, Piers, I mean, one of the things we've seen from the St. Louis Fed is that they have found that in the 3 years after the first mass market product, Gen AI adoption has outpaced both PCs and the internet.
Yeah.
So on that metric, you're seeing this very much accelerated adoption, and this is something we think is going to be a huge tailwind for 2026.
June?
I'll point out one anecdotal evidence there in terms of the return on AI investments as well. So Microsoft now discloses AI revenues under their earnings. It's as a line item under Azure results in their results, and you can see from there it took Microsoft about 6 years to break the 10 billion mark in revenue from Azure and cloud services. For AI investments in AI products, it took them 3 years. So it's taken them half the time to reach that 10 billion mark. So that kind of gives a good insight into how companies are able to perhaps monetize these AI technologies much quicker than the previous generation of technologies that we saw.
I feel the need for speed, I guess, is the statement to close that one. Very interesting comments from you both. Thank you for joining, and I'm sure we will have you back soon.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Before we go, don't forget to check out our sister podcast, Under the Banyan Tree, where hosts Fred Newman and Harold van der Linde put Asian markets and economics into context. And a reminder that clients can keep up to date with our latest research with our mobile app. Head to Apple's App Store or Google Play to download it. And finally, if you have any questions or comments, you can get in touch with us at askresearch@hsbc.com. So that's all we've got time for on today's Macro Brief, hosted by me, Piers Butler, and produced by Tom Barton. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
Thank you for joining us at HSBC Global Viewpoint. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. Make sure you're subscribed to stay up to date with new episodes.